Imagine it is the year 1250. The night is long. The stone walls around you are as cold as ice, and the bitter winter wind seeps through every crack and corner. You are inside a great castle, a fortress built to withstand armies, but not the cold. Now ask yourself, how do people sleep here? How do they survive these freezing nights without the comforts we take for granted today? Modern science tells us that humans lose heat rapidly through our breath, our skin, and our surroundings. Without insulation, a person could freeze in just a few hours of exposure to extreme cold. Yet, in the Middle Ages across Europe, millions of men, women, and children slept in these stone fortresses every winter. They lived, they survived. The question is, how? The answer began with the bed itself. In medieval castles, beds were not mere pieces of furniture. They were fortresses within fortresses, enormous wooden frames, stuffed with straw, layered with animal skins, wool, and furs. And then curtains, thick drapes that closed tightly, trapping precious body heat inside. In many ways, a medieval bed was like a personal tent, a cocoon of warmth against the stone chill. But warmth did not come from blankets alone. In the heart of every great hall stood a massive fire, logs as thick as a man's leg burned throughout the night, their heat radiating across the chamber. Servants carried heated stones, wrapped in cloth, placing them under the bed to warm the sheets. It was a ritual of survival, technology born not of invention but of necessity, and sometimes survival meant togetherness. Medieval families often slept side by side, sharing body heat. In peasant cottages, it was not unusual for entire families, even livestock, to share a single room. The warmth of a cow or a sheep could mean the difference between life and death. Yet, the night was not only about warmth. It was about fear, mystery, and survival. In the medieval mind, darkness was sacred and dangerous. The cold night tested not only the body, but the spirit. To survive was not simply to endure the cold, but to embrace a way of life where every dawn felt like a small miracle. Today, we live in climate-controlled homes, wrapped in electric warmth, barely giving a thought to the freezing nights of old. But in those castles, among the stone walls and flickering fires, every night was a battle. And in that struggle, medieval people found resilience, creativity, and a closeness that bound families together. Their world was cold, yet their spirit was never frozen. And perhaps that is the greatest warmth of all. History is not just about kings and wars. It is about how ordinary people survived the night. The night falls over a medieval castle, and the world outside turns into ice. The walls of stone rise high, proud and strong, built to defend against armies and sieges. But those same walls, the pride of the castle, carried another enemy within them, cold. Thick blocks of stone held no warmth. They absorbed the chill of winter and released it slowly into the chambers, making the air inside as biting as the wind outside. If you have ever walked through a castle ruin today, even in summer, you know that feeling, the echo of dampness, the way the air clings to your skin, and the strange, hollow chill that never seems to leave. Now imagine that same sensation in the middle of winter, when snow covered the fields, when the rivers froze, and when the sun seemed only a pale shadow of its summer self. Life in those castles was a struggle against the cold. It wasn't only uncomfortable, it was dangerous. The medieval period was marked by what historians call the Little Ice Age, a time when Europe endured harsher winters than today. Snow could cover the ground for months. Temperatures dropped so low that even mighty rivers like the Thames in London froze solid. Without insulation, without central heating, every night was a test of endurance. People did not measure their comfort in warmth, but in survival. Inside the castle, the rooms were enormous. Great halls with ceilings so high that the warmth of fire rose above reach, leaving people on the floor shivering. Drafts slipped through arrow slits in windows, often covered only with oil parchment or wooden shutters. In some cases, tapestries were hung not just for decoration, but to block out the freezing air that pushed through the walls. Imagine sitting near a torch or a candle. It gave light, yes, but almost no warmth. The darkness of the night was heavy, and the only real refuge was the glow of a fire. Even the noble families, surrounded by luxury compared to peasants, fought with the same enemy. Kings and queens at grand chambers, But grandeur did not equal comfort. A royal bedchamber might have had painted walls, gold accents, and heavy furniture. But as night fell, those rooms were still as cold as a cavern. It is said that King Henry VIII kept enormous fires burning constantly in his palaces, and still he complained of the cold. His courtiers wore heavy layers of wool, fur, and linen indoors, and even then their hands would tremble as they wrote letters or played instruments. For the servants and guards, the struggle was even greater. Many slept in corridors, guard towers, or storage rooms, where a single fire was far away and the cold cut through their thin blankets. Guards on night watch stood on battlements, exposed to icy winds that swept across the landscape. Some would stamp their feet, clap their hands, and pray for dawn to come quickly. Every night was a reminder of the castle's double nature, safe from attack, but merciless in its climate. It was not only the physical cold that haunted them. With cold came sickness. Winter brought coughs, fevers, and chills without proper medicine. Even something as small as a cold could grow into pneumonia and take a life. People learned quickly that staying warm was more than comfort. It was survival. The night air was seen as dangerous, and with good reason. Medieval doctors believed that cold air carried illness, and though their science was limited, their instincts were not wrong. Many who failed to guard themselves against the chill did not live to see spring. The soundscape of the castle at night was unlike anything today. Fires cracked softly in great halls. Boots scraped along stone floors, and the distant howl of the wind echoed through stairways and towers. In noble rooms, you might hear the rustle of curtains as they were pulled tight around beds, or the shuffle of servants carrying heated stones wrapped in cloth to chase away the frost from bedding. In the servants' quarters, you might hear whispers, soft prayers, or the shiver of teeth. And all across the castle, from the lord to the lowest kitchen boy, one thought tied them together: how to endure until morning. This reality shaped medieval life in ways we often forget. Castles were not cozy homes. They were fortresses built for survival in war. Comfort was always sacrificed for strength, and yet people adapted. The cold forced creativity, rituals, and a reliance on one another that built the rhythm of their nights. Each sunrise was not taken for granted. To wake up warm, or even alive, was its own kind of victory. When we picture a medieval castle today, it is easy to imagine roaring fires, feasts, and laughter echoing off stone walls. But behind the pageantry, every person, lord, lady, knight, or servant, faced the same nightly challenge. The enemy was not only beyond the walls. It was the air itself, creeping, invisible, relentless. This was the cold reality of castles, the quiet struggle that defined every night of the Middle Ages. And that is where our story begins. In the cold heart of the medieval castle, survival often came down to a single piece of furniture: the bed. At first thought, a bed may seem ordinary, something we barely think about today. But in the Middle Ages, a bed was far more than a place to rest. It was a shield against the night, a fortress within the fortress, a carefully crafted weapon in the battle against the cold. Beds of the medieval nobility were unlike anything we see in modern bedrooms. They were enormous, built from heavy oak or walnut, carved with intricate patterns that showed wealth and power. Yet, size and decoration were not their only purpose. Their true function was protection. Large frames allowed for deep mattresses stuffed with straw, hay, or even feathers for those wealthy enough to afford them. Over these came layers: linen sheets, wool blankets, fur covers, and sometimes even quilts stitched with colorful designs. Each layer added not just comfort, but insulation. One of the most remarkable features was the curtain. Medieval beds were often enclosed by thick drapes that surrounded all four sides. Once drawn shut, these curtains created a pocket of warmth, sealing in body heat and keeping out the draft that slipped through stone walls and wooden shutters. In many ways, a medieval bed was like a tent indoors, a private microclimate carved out an otherwise freezing room. Without these curtains, even the richest lord might shiver through the night. The design of the bed also reflected status. For kings and queens, beds were grand statements of power, often placed on raised platforms, so they appeared almost like thrones. The larger and taller the bed, the greater the impression of authority. In fact, Beds were sometimes so valuable they were listed in wills and passed down through generations like treasures. A noble bed was not just a place to sleep. It was an heirloom, a symbol of legacy, and a sanctuary from the bitter nights. But the bed was not reserved only for sleep. It was the most private space a person had in a castle. Nobles received close advisors from their beds, spoke with family members, and even ate their meals there when winter was too harsh. Curtains gave not only warmth, but privacy in a world where servants were always nearby. In a way, the bed became a chamber within a chamber, offering both physical comfort and psychological safety. For those lower on the social ladder, the situation was far more modest, yet the principle was the same. Servants and soldiers might sleep on wooden frames stuffed with straw, or even directly on the floor with simple pallets. They had no curtains to shield them from drafts. Instead, they layered themselves with rough woolen blankets or animal skins, huddling together when needed. Peasants who worked the land often returned to cottages rather than castles, where beds were shared by entire families. Children slept alongside parents, and in some cases, even livestock was brought inside to share body heat. It was survival by closeness, a nightly reminder of how fragile human life was against the elements. The materials used in these beds tell us much about medieval ingenuity. Straw, though humble, was replaced regularly to keep bedding fresh and dry. Wool was favored for blankets because it was warm even when damp. Furs, such as sheepskin, deerskin, or bear hides, added both weight and insulation, trapping warmth where thin cloth could not. In wealthier homes, feather beds offered a softness that peasants could never imagine. These layers turned a bed into a carefully engineered defense against the night, designed as much for survival as for rest. Even the placement of the bed in the room mattered. Noble beds were often positioned away from windows and doors to escape drafts. Some were placed near fireplaces, so the last embers of the evening could provide at least a touch of heat, but not too close. Fire was always a danger. A bed, with its curtains and layers of fabric, could catch flame easily. Thus, every placement was a careful balance between warmth and safety. In winter months, the ritual of preparing a bed was almost sacred. Servants would shake out straw, tuck in sheets, and lay heavy blankets one on top of another. Heated stones or metal bed warmers filled with coals might be slipped under covers to take the edge off the chill before their lord or lady entered. Curtains were drawn tight, and candles were placed nearby to cast a dim, golden glow inside the enclosure. The result was not just a place to sleep, but a small world of comfort carved out of frozen castle air. The very way people thought about beds was different from today. To us, sleep is ordinary, routine, and almost unnoticed. To them, it was preparation, endurance, and relief. Each night was a test, and each bed was an ally in facing it. The warmth of a bed meant not just rest, but survival. And for those who had no such luxuries, the bed was a reminder of the divide between rich and poor, between nobility wrapped in fur-lined curtains and servants shivering in the cold stone corridors. In truth, the medieval bed was more than furniture. It was a statement of status, a symbol of survival, and a sanctuary from the endless chill of castle life. Within its heavy curtains, behind its layers of wool and fur, lay the only true refuge from the cold reality that pressed against the walls of every medieval home. For those who lived in the Middle Ages, a bed was not simply where the day ended. It was where the battle for life continued. When night came to a medieval castle, the greatest ally against the cold was fire. For thousands of years, humans had turned to flame for warmth. But within the walls of stone castles, fire was more than comfort. It was survival, and at times, a matter of life and death. Without it, no bed, no blanket, and no curtain could hold back the freezing air that slipped through cracks and lingered in every corner. The centerpiece of castle life was a great hall, and at its heart burned a massive hearth. These fires were not small flames, but roaring blazes, fed with huge logs that could burn through the night. The fire gave light to a room otherwise filled with shadow, and its heat was shared by everyone who gathered near. Lords, ladies, guards, and servants all depended on its glow. The warmth, however, spread unevenly. Those who sat close to the hearth felt their skin prickle with heat, while those further back were left in the draft, watching the smoke curl into the rafters. Yet even with this great effort, the fire's reach was limited. The vast size of castle rooms meant that cold still claimed the outer edges, leaving many to huddle in layers of cloth despite the flames. In private chambers, fireplaces were smaller, built into the walls of noble rooms. These were carefully designed to draw smoke upward through chimneys, a technology that only became common in the later Middle Ages. Before chimneys, smoke from fires would linger in the air, blackening ceilings and stinging eyes. With chimneys, castles became slightly more bearable, allowing fires to burn in more rooms without choking their inhabitants. Still, the heat produced by a single fireplace could never compare to the warmth of modern heating. It was a patch of comfort, not a solution for an entire castle. Because of this, people turned to clever ways to stretch what warmth they had. One method was the use of heated stones. Large rocks were placed near a fire until they glowed with heat, then carefully wrapped in cloth or slipped into wooden containers. Servants carried them into chambers, placing them beneath blankets or at the foot of a bed. The stones radiated heat slowly, warming the sheets just enough to make climbing into bed less of a shock. In some homes, metal pans filled with embers, called bed warmers, were used in much the same way, slid between blankets to chase away the frost. But they carried risk. A careless hand could start a fire, and so they were used with caution. Braziers, metal bowls filled with burning coals, were another tool. These portable heaters were set in corners of rooms, or carried from chamber to chamber. Their glow added both light and heat, though again, danger was never far. A knocked-over brazier could set rush mats or tapestries ablaze. Castles, for all their strength against siege, were surprisingly vulnerable to fire within. Yet people accepted these risks, for without fire, survival was unthinkable. The fuel itself was a constant concern. A roaring hearth consumed a staggering amount of wood. Forests near castles were stripped to provide fuel for winter months. In some areas, peat, a dense, earthy material cut from marshes, was burned when wood was scarce. Charcoal, too, was used, burning hotter and longer than raw logs. Managing these supplies required planning and labor, for without fuel, even the grandest castle would become a frozen tomb. For the poor, ingenuity took on different forms. In cottages far from noble chambers, fires burned in open pits on the floor, the smoke rising through a simple hole in the roof. Families used every scrap of fuel they could find, dry branches, straw, even animal dung. The smell was harsh, but the heat it gave off meant survival. These fires were rarely left to die, for reigniting them could be difficult. Instead, embers were covered in ash to smolder through the night, ready to spark again at dawn. Fire also played a role in the rhythm of life. It was the center of gathering. Families sat near it, meals were cooked over it, and stories were told by its light. In the castle, servants took turns tending fires through the night, ensuring they did not burn out completely. Without them, waking to a cold room could be dangerous, especially for the very young or the elderly. But fire alone was not enough, and people knew it. That is why so much effort went into layering warmth. Curtains around beds, thick clothing, and communal sleeping. Fire gave the first defense, and human ingenuity filled the gaps. Heated stones, braziers, and careful rituals transformed a meager heat of wood into a system of survival. Still, one must imagine the feeling of walking through a medieval castle in the dead of winter. The fires roared, yes, but beyond their glow lay stretches of icy corridors, stairwells where drafts whistled, and chambers where the cold clung like a shadow. The flickering flame became a symbol of hope in the darkness. It represented safety, life, and continuity. Without it, the walls of stone would have been unbearable. With it, people endured night after night, century after century. It is easy to forget, in an age where we turn a switch and banish the cold, how much of medieval survival depended on fire. It was not simply a source of warmth. It was the heart of the household, the very core of life within those walls. To live in a castle without freezing was not a matter of comfort. It was a matter of fire, stones, and the remarkable resourcefulness of people who refused to be defeated by the cold. Inside the thick walls of medieval castles, with a wind to howl like a beast and snow piled against stone towers, sleep was not simply a matter of lying down and closing one's eyes. It was survival. At the heart of this nightly battle with the cold was fire. flickering, crackling, and breathing warmth into otherwise icy chambers. Without modern insulation, central heating, or even glass in most windows, fire was often the only barrier between comfort and misery. But how exactly did these flames keep people alive in such unforgiving conditions? The story is more fascinating than it first appears. Castles were built primarily for defense, not comfort. Their massive stone walls could withstand catapults and sieges, but stone is a terrible insulator. It absorbs the day's chill and releases it into the rooms, leaving interiors colder than the outside air. Imagine walking into your chamber in January, only to find frost forming on the inside of your walls. To combat this, fires had to burn constantly. But not all fires were equal. Wealth and rank determined whether someone warmed themselves before a grand hearth or huddled around a simple brazier. For the lords and ladies, the great halls served as a central hub of warmth. At the heart of these vast spaces, enormous fireplaces, sometimes large enough to walk into, burned with roaring flames. The smoke curled up through wide chimneys, while sparks illuminated the high rafters. The heat radiated outward, and those seated closest to the fire basked in its glow. Yet even here, warmth was uneven. The side facing the fire might feel hot, while your back could still sting with cold. It was common to turn constantly, roasting one side and then the other, like meat on a spit. Servants and guards rarely had such luxury. Their quarters were simpler, with small hearths or even portable braziers, metal bowls filled with burning charcoal. These gave off steady heat, but came with risks. Without proper ventilation, the fumes could be deadly, silently poisoning those inside. Yet for many, it was worth the risk because the alternative was unbearable freezing nights. To minimize dangers, braziers were sometimes placed near open slits in the wall, letting smoke and gases escape, though this also led in the cold. In the most bitter winters, fire alone was not enough. People learned to stretch its warmth further. They placed heated stones or bricks from the hearth into beds, wrapped in cloth to prevent burns. These crude bed warmers gave comfort for a short while, slowly releasing heat under the heavy covers. In some castles, hot coals were shoveled into special metal pans with long handles, slipped between the sheets before someone retired for the night. By the time the sleeper climbed into bed, the chill was replaced with gentle warmth. Fire also played a role in the castle's daily rhythm. Servants worked tirelessly to keep the flames alive. It was a chore that required vigilance. If the fire went out in the middle of a freezing night, it meant starting from scratch, striking flint, coaxing sparks, and blowing on kindling until smoke curled once more. This was no easy task. So many castles kept a perpetual flame, feeding it day and night. It wasn't just convenience, it was survival insurance. Beyond warmth, fire was a gathering place. In an age without electricity, the glow of the hearth was both light and heat. Families, soldiers, and servants clustered around, telling stories, eating meals, or simply sitting in silence, grateful for the warmth. The hearth became the heartbeat of the castle. It was more than just a fireplace. It was where life pulsed most strongly against the cold darkness outside. Yet even the richest fire could not warm an entire castle. Bedrooms often had their own smaller fireplaces, but many were inefficient. Chimneys, though ingenious, carried away more heat than they preserved. Drafts whistled through cracks, undoing much of the fire's work. To counter this, people layered their defenses. Fires roared, curtains were drawn tightly around beds, and tapestries lined the walls to trap as much warmth as possible. What is striking is not just how fire kept people alive, but how it shaped their lives. Social status, daily routines, and even the layout of castles were influenced by the need for warmth. The great hall's design centered around its fireplace, and the division of comfort between nobility and servants was often marked by proximity to flames. Today, we flick a switch and fill our homes with instant heat. But in the Middle Ages, fire was not guaranteed. It was fought for, maintained, and revered. To lose it was to risk frostbite, sickness, or death. This makes the nightly routine of sitting before the hearth, warming hands, or slipping into a bed prepared with heated stones not just a comfort, but an act of resilience. And so, inside these mighty stone fortresses, fire burned with purpose. It stood between life and the deadly cold. The dance of flames on rough-hewn walls told a story of survival, of ingenuity, and of the simple human desire for warmth. The castles may seem timeless, but their fires tell us something deeply human, that no matter how powerful or humble, everyone in the Middle Ages shared the same nightly need, to chase away the cold and hold on to life's fragile warmth. Life inside a medieval castle was shaped by more than just walls of stone and the glow of fire. Beyond architecture and survival, the culture of sleep itself was different from the way we understand it today. Nighttime routines, superstitions, and even beliefs about the human body created a world where sleep was not a single stretch of rest, but a carefully divided ritual. To understand how people truly experience their nights, we have to step into their chambers and into their minds. In many medieval households, sleep came in two parts. The first was what we might call first sleep, beginning not long after nightfall, after several hours of rest. People often awoke in the middle of the night. This period of wakefulness could last an hour or more, and during that time they prayed, tended the fire, or even visited neighbors. It was seen as a natural part of the night, not an interruption. Afterward came second sleep, a return to bed until dawn. This two-part pattern was so common that it appeared in medical texts, literature, and even legal documents of the era. For the people of the Middle Ages, night was never just one long stretch of unconsciousness. It was broken, punctuated by activity, and filled with meaning. Prayers and rituals often framed these waking hours. People believed the middle of the night was especially powerful, a time when one could reach heaven through whispered words. Monks used these hours for vigils, while common people recited psalms, asked for protection, or reflected on their lives. Some used the time for quiet conversation, storytelling, or even planning the next day. For lovers, these moments were intimate and private, hidden away from the demands of daylight. Sleep, then, was both physical and spiritual, a rhythm tied as much to faith as to fatigue. Superstitions also shaped how people approached the night. Darkness was often feared, believed to be a time when evil spirits and restless souls wandered freely. Many slept with charms, relics, or crosses near their beds, hoping to guard against nightmares or illnesses that were thought to strike in the vulnerable hours of sleep. Doors were bolted, shutters closed tight, and curtains drawn not only to hold in warmth, but also to keep out what was unseen. Even the way beds were arranged reflected beliefs. Some avoided sleeping with their heads facing north, fearing it brought misfortune. Dreams held special importance. In an age where science was limited, dreams were often interpreted as messages, warnings, or even glimpses of the future. A pleasant dream could bring comfort, while a disturbing vision might send someone to confess their sins the next day. Physicians of the time sometimes used dreams as a clue to a person's health, believing the body revealed its hidden struggles through nighttime images. Sleep, then, was never just about rest. It was a doorway into mysteries that people tried desperately to understand. Another difference between then and now was the social nature of sleep. Privacy was rare in a castle. Servants often slept in the same chambers as their masters, curled up near hearths or in corners. Families might share beds, with children piled alongside parents under heavy layers of blankets and furs. Even noble couples rarely slept alone. A retinue of attendants could be nearby, keeping watch, tending fires, or standing ready to serve. For travelers or guests, sharing beds with strangers was not unusual, a practice that today would feel deeply uncomfortable but back then was seen as ordinary necessity. Within this crowded world, the bed itself carried symbolic weight. For nobles, it was more than a place to sleep. It was a stage for ceremony. Births, marriages, and even deaths often took place in bed, surrounded by family or attendants. A finely decorated bed, draped in embroidered curtains, announced wealth and power. It was a mark of status, displayed with pride, much like a throne or banquet table. To lie down at night was not just a rest, but to enter a space layered with meaning, tradition, and identity. But not everyone had the luxury of fine beds or embroidered sheets. For the lower ranks of castle life, servants, guards, and laborers, sleeping conditions were much simpler. Straw pallets, rough blankets, or even bare wooden boards might serve as a bed. Cloaks doubled as covers, and boots were sometimes kept on through the night to retain warmth. These conditions highlight the divide within the castle walls. While the lord and lady enjoyed feather mattresses, others made do with what little they had. Yet even in such hardship, sleep remained precious. It was the one universal pause, a necessity shared across all ranks. Interestingly, the idea of bedtime itself was flexible. Artificial light was scarce and expensive, so life followed the rhythm of the sun and firelight. People went to bed early in winter, often soon after dark, but stayed up later in summer, enjoying the extended daylight. Candles and oil lamps stretched the night only for the wealthy, casting golden glows in noble chambers, while others relied on the simple light of the hearth. What stands out in all of this is how deeply human sleep was in the medieval world, shaped by fear, faith, community, and the constant struggle against cold. It was not simply an act of closing one's eyes, but a woven fabric of ritual and meaning. Every element, from the first crackle of fire to the final prayer whispered before sleep, reveals how people of that time balanced survival with belief. Today, with soft mattresses, central heating, and electric lights, we forget how fragile and uncertain the act of sleeping once was. For those in medieval castles, the night was never ordinary. It was a time of vulnerability, but also a connection to God, to family, and to the very rhythms of the body. In this way, sleep in the Middle Ages tells us as much about the human spirit as it does about survival. It reminds us that even in the harshest conditions, people found ways to rest, to dream, and prepare for the challenges of another day. When we picture medieval castles today, we often imagine them as cold, drafty fortresses where comfort was scarce and survival was a daily challenge. Yet the reality was more layered, and the story of how people slept reveals not just how they endured the cold, but also how they crafted moments of warmth, intimacy, and even luxury amid stone walls and endless winters. The truth is that these castles, while imposing and severe on the outside, held inside them a constant battle between nature and human ingenuity. And in that struggle, the way people approached sleep became a mirror of their resilience. At first glance, the idea of sleeping in a stone chamber with open windows and icy drafts seems unbearable. But medieval life was not defined by surrender. It was defined by adaptation. From tapestries hung to trap heat to the careful layering of furs and blankets, every choice was an act of defiance against the cold. The canopy bed, with its thick curtains, was not only a symbol of wealth, but also a practical invention, creating a small cocoon where body heat could be trapped and preserved through the night. Each layer of wool, each fur pelt laid across the mattress, was a silent victory over freezing winds. Fire remained at the heart of survival, but it was more than just survival. It was ritual, a rhythm of life that marked every evening. Servants who tended the flames, masters who gathered by the hearth, families who prayed before slipping beneath covers. All were bound together by the shared human need to stay warm, to rest, and to dream. Even the act of placing heated stones or coal pans in beds carried with it a certain tenderness, a preparation for comfort in a world that was often unforgiving. Beyond the practical, though, lies something even more fascinating: the meaning people gave to sleep. The broken rhythm of first sleep and second sleep shaped how they understood their nights. That waking moment between the two halves of slumber was not wasted time. It was filled with prayer, reflection, and often a sense of stillness that few of us experience today. In those quiet hours, with only the fire crackling and the wind rattling shutters, people connected to something larger than themselves. Sleep was not only physical, it was spiritual, a nightly journey that blended faith with the body's needs. This relationship with sleep also revealed the stark contrast of medieval life. Lords rested on feather mattresses beneath embroidered hangings, their beds a mark of power and prestige. Meanwhile, guards curled on wooden boards or straw pallets, their cloaks pulled tightly around them as they dozed between shifts. Servants huddled in corners, sharing warmth where they could, sometimes sleeping side by side with animals to keep the chill at bay. The castle was a fortress, but within its walls, comfort was never evenly shared. Sleep became a privilege divided by rank, wealth, and circumstance. And yet, in this diversity, a common thread unites them all: the pursuit of rest in an environment where the elements were always pressing in. Whether under heavy furs in a noble's chamber or on rough straw in a servant's quarters, every sleeper carried the same hope: that they would awaken renewed, ready for the next day's labors or challenges. That universality makes medieval sleep not just a historical curiosity, but a human story we can all understand. It is also striking how much of what they did to survive the cold shaped traditions that continue for centuries. The heavy use of curtains, the central place of the hearth, and even the design of bedrooms in later centuries grew out of these early battles with the cold. What began as necessity eventually transformed into symbols of style, wealth, and culture. The medieval bed, once purely practical, became an heirloom passed down through generations, carrying with it the memories of countless nights. For us today, surrounded by the ease of central heating, insulated walls, and electric light, it can be difficult to imagine the vulnerability of sleeping in such conditions. But stepping into their world reminds us of how fragile, and at the same time, how resilient human life can be. Every measure, whether it was stoking a fire, layering a blanket, or whispering a prayer, was a reminder that people did not just endure the night. They shaped it, made it their own, and filled it with meaning. What makes this story compelling is that it isn't only about the past. It speaks to something timeless, our shared need for warmth, rest, and safety. When we strip away the stone walls, the fur blankets, and the flickering torches, we see ourselves in them. We too long for comfort at the end of a day, for a space where the world outside cannot reach us. The medieval sleepers may have lived in harsher conditions, but their search for peace at night is no different from ours. So when we ask how people in medieval castles slept without freezing to death, the answer is not simple. They survived through fire and furs, through rituals and routines, but also through resilience. They turned stone fortresses into homes, cold nights into moments of connection, and vulnerability into traditions that lasted long after the Middle Ages ended. Their nights tell us that history is not just about battles and kings, but about ordinary lives, about the quiet hours where people sought rest in a world that often gave them little peace. In the end, what we find is not just a lesson in history, but a reminder of endurance. People endured the cold, they endured the hardships, but they did more than that. They created warmth, they made meaning, and they found ways to rest even in the harshest of settings. That is perhaps the greatest legacy of medieval sleep. It shows us not only how people survived, but how they lived. As the last embers of the castle's fire fade into darkness, we are left with a haunting truth. Sleep in the Middle Ages was not simply rest, but a nightly triumph over the cold, over fear, and over the relentless weight of stone walls that guarded more than just lives. They guarded fragile dreams. Each night, noble or servant, guard or child, entered a battle that did not involve swords or arrows, but silence, frost, and shadows. What kept them alive was not just fire or furs, but resilience, ritual, and the shared human instinct to protect what mattered most. Think of it. Every bed curtain drawn tight, every whispered prayer in the darkness, every heated stone slipped beneath the covers tells us something timeless. The struggle for warmth and safety was not unique to the past. It is part of the human story that stretches into our own lives. We may sleep today on memory foam with thermostats controlling the room, but the desire is the same: to find comfort, to feel secure, to dream without fear. So when you imagine the flicker of a torch along the cold walls of a medieval castle, remember this. The night was not just endured, it was mastered. And within that mastery lies a lesson that even in the harshest of worlds, humans have always found a way to turn survival into something more, a fragile but enduring piece of humanity itself.